Hey, so instead of doing anything particularly impactful in the garden, today I actually want to tell my story. I want to tell my garden story as a fourth year gardener because it's springtime, proper time to reflect. And I realize I've never properly introduced myself. So, my name is Litho Freeman. I am a 35-year-old veteran. I got my degree in filmmaking and media. And much like many of you, I actually started gardening during the pandemic. And during that 2020 period, I had a great grandmother who was actually suffering from dementia. So I decided to come back home. I got a rental and immediately got to work on my first little garden bed. It was, 5 pieces of plywood with a wooden bottom. And, I'm sure I don't have to tell many people, but it did not work out. Didn't work out at all, but I had found such relief just wanting things to grow. It really helped me get over my breakup. Right as things started to get shut down, I was actually going through a pretty bad breakup with a longtime girlfriend at that time, and I needed some relief. I needed to get out of my head. I needed to get out of my space. So I ventured outside. Fast forward to 2021, and I am purchasing my very first home. And for anybody who has purchased a home, I'm sure you know how much downtime there is in between finding a home and actually being able to move in. So during that 2-month period, I actually spent the entire time on YouTube studying what I want my garden to look like. So within 12 days of me moving inside of my first home, I had 7 double dig beds in the backyard. And my back has not forgiven me since, I promise you. So at that time, because it was a very new garden that was in a place that had never been gardened before, my biggest concerns about the soil were actually like the drainage, the compaction, and, the lack of air pockets in general. This soil was so hard and so stiff because grass had just been growing over it, for God, who knows how long. The house was built in the 30s, so I assume the grass had been here since the 30s, or at least, soon after building. I think my biggest problem during that time was actually understanding how much I needed to work the soil. So that first year went as good as one might expect. I can say I did have my biggest garlic harvest that year, though. So let's jump forward to 2022, which was actually my second season here at the house. And of course, that whole winter previous, I was, looking things up, trying to grow my confidence. I came up with a better plan as far as like what I actually wanted in the yard because I understood how the sun worked throughout the day. Many a times you don't know anything until after that first season passes, which sucks for brand new gardeners. But that second season, your confidence is strong and you're so ready for the spring, as was I. And with that readiness, I overlooked many things, to say the least. Number one, proper trellising. Soon I would realize how much the grass around my beds actually were affecting the plants inside the beds. So I opted to cover up all of my grass with wood chips. It was a very large undertaking, and when it was done, my yard had never looked sexier. I promise you. It was so clean, such a nice design. And with that joy soon came tragedy because the grandmother that I had come back to Pittsburgh, to help take care of and just be around, I had actually passed away. And then the garden at that point became something different for me. Once again, I needed a space outside of my head, outside of my home, outside of my room, away from the pictures of my great grandmother and the memories. And the garden became a place of refuge where I just needed to find peace, whether things were growing or not. I had really come to a crossroads mentally with how much I wanted to actually produce and how much I just needed a space. And at that point is when I needed to have the social pit inside of my garden because with me being outside so much, I wanted to be surrounded by the garden, not just upstairs, on my patio. I wanted to be inside. So that's when I rented an excavator and dug out a 20-foot pit inside of the garden. And at that point, I truly feel like I became a gardener. And that's when the love of the game truly had overtaken me, because it had helped me through emotional struggles. It had fed me. It became a place of peace. It became what I needed in my life. So then we jump to 2023, which is actually my third season here in the house. And during that winter, I decided that I wanted a greenhouse, goddammit. It seemed like everybody around me were getting greenhouses, whether they were the small kind of cheapy setups or like the mini glass houses. And I just started to feel left out. So I put all my energy into finding something I could make a greenhouse out of. And that's when Facebook Marketplace blessed me with the most random post. Some guy had built a structure for his patio that he was taking down, and it was perfect. Within 2 weeks, I had gotten to work all by myself. I had lost the greenhouse. I rebuilt it, fortified it, and I actually had plants in by the end of that March. It was such a crazy triumph because I realized how much more I could do with my planting season, both at the beginning and the end, just with adding a nice little greenhouse outside. Also, during that third year, two very important things had happened. Number one, I had gotten my sowing schedule down packed. I finally got in my head that it takes plants roughly 45 days before they're truly ready to go outside, especially the winter sown plants. And on that third year, my soil had never been better than it was that year. I believe most gardeners say the garden had settled in by that time, because I was getting 12-foot sunflower plants. My chard was exploding. Everything that I put inside the ground seemed to be reaching optimal health and optimal size. And I attribute that to 2 years of working the soil, adding compost, adding perlite, doing all the things that we are told to do, but I don't feel like most people actually tell you that it takes a while for your soil to actually calm down, get to that perfect balance. And for me, it didn't happen until year 3. Also, in year 3, I decided to actually get on YouTube, thanks to the suggestions of many friends and family who had come over and said that my yard was actually YouTubeable. It was something that they had never seen. And before then, I didn't feel like I wanted to get on YouTube at all, especially with gardening, because the space was one of healing, one of solace, like I said before, one of refuge, because of everything going on in my life. But by year 3, I had settled those emotions inside of me, and I felt like the education that I could provide, specifically to cold weather gardeners, was much more valuable, to me at that point. Because one thing that I have to say about YouTube gardeners, most of them are located on the West Coast or down south. These people are growing all year around, and it's beautiful, and it makes for great YouTube channels. But at that time, I didn't see many gardening channels for zone 6, zone 5. No one cares about us cold weather gardeners just because we get winter. And that's not fair. So that's when I came out with my first couple of videos. I actually think the first one was maybe a July tour, or the beginning of my pepper daddy phase with my big pepper harvest. I just wanted to show people here in the northern states that you can have a very fruitful garden all the way until the winter, and sometimes, especially if you have a greenhouse, even survive the winter. So it was very important to get out the perspective of a cold weather liver, a cold weather resident, a cold weather human, that we can actually grow our own food. And it has been my mission to show cold weather gardeners how much and how varied of food they can actually grow. So that leads us into 2024, the 4th year here at the house, where I actually had decided to take some free wood from a very terrible factory job I was working and turn that into 6 or 7 different garden beds around the yard, because I realized that the in-ground beds without better protection would just never make it. So as I was building the beds and putting more work on the channel, that's when the explosion of the channel happened, and many of yins have found me for the first time. And honestly, I still can't be more appreciative of everybody who watches, my videos in my humble little gardening corner. So even though everything was primed to be better than ever in the garden, my soil was perfect. I got the weather patterns down. My sowing is just right. The wood chips that I had put all over the yard to protect my garden from the grass had decomposed that winter. So my garden quickly filled up with so many weeds and grasses everywhere, which allowed more pests and insects to fester in my yard. But along with the negatives came tons of positives. I grew things that I had never grown before. I was growing okra. I didn't even know that could grow up here in the old Appalachia Mountains. I realized I liked okra. I started cooking with it more. I realized that I actually had way more uses for fennel than I ever had. I like beets. Who knew? I like Brussels sprouts. I was able to grow and try all these very different nutritious things because I had such a confidence in my gardening ability by that 4th year. I could look at a leaf and tell when I've been overwatering, or I can tell when something isn't growing as fast as it should be, so I might have some type of root knot going on. So satisfying to feel confident in the gardening space, and that only happened after 4 years. And at the same time, I have this little humble YouTube channel that's growing up. So with this audience, I'm trying to figure out how can I better add value for the people who are watching my channel. So I started working on a coloring book that I released a month or so ago. I got the idea of coming up with some type of Patreon series due to comments from watchers like yourself, who felt like you just wanted to support me in some sort of way, which makes my heart warm. It truly, truly does. Now we're here in 2025, my 5th year here at the garden, and I've changed my garden beds once more. This garden right now looks nothing like when I first started, and it's because of growing and realizing the amount of space, the amount of protection, the amount of, soil that was in between the beds. I figured, why not combine the beds and make one big bed, and I can have that classic gardening aesthetic that I grew to really want. Gardening is all about growing in your space, realizing what you like, what the soil likes, what your wind pattern likes. I understand that in the springtime, I get these very harsh winds that are coming right now. And during the summertime, it's going to be really dry because of global warming. So the first 2 months of the summer, I need to really be on my watering and, all these things that I have learned by just being inside of the garden. And that is what I wanted to portray with this video of gardening is a full journey. I know many of us watch YouTubers and we think that their garden just kind of popped up and they made it happen. And although all the information is very valuable, I want you to walk away from this video understanding that gardening takes time and growth takes time. And we are all growing, we're all trying. Every day is different. Every year, every season is different, and we're still trying. So here on the 5th season of Pittsburgh Home Garden, I welcome you to join me on furthering my gardening journey so I can help you further your gardening journey with education, with videos, a couple laughs, and a lot of experiments, no matter the space, if you have a huge farm or just a patio in your backyard. So thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll be here gardening.